We're going to be talking about youth sports concussions. I've got a couple of guests to share some information with you on that. We're also going to hear from somebody who's been in the situation of having their home burned to the ground from one of the fires in Washington this summer. So we'll do that secondarily, but first I want to welcome my first in-studio guest, and that is Dr. Rich Jacobs from Richland. He is part of the Northwest Orthopedic Association, also is involved in sports medicine. And Dr. Jacobs, you were telling me that you also were on the sidelines for Notre Dame. What was that like?
Oh, that was a very exciting 5 years between 2005 and 2010 when I was one of the team physicians there. And yeah, it was kind of the culmination of my sports medicine training, and it was a wonderful experience.
Well, I'm going to guess that you saw some head concussions there.
We did. Concussions were a fairly frequent diagnosis, not only in football, but in all the other 25 sports that they have there. I worked closely with the hockey and soccer teams there, women's soccer, so yes, I took care of concussions on a regular basis.
So at the highest level, which is the National Football League, I mean, recently, I'm going to say within, all of this has occurred within really the last 10 years, but PBS did a documentary on Frontline that really shared the dangers of head concussions with football players to the general public. Then there was a lawsuit and a settlement involving the NFL and players. There's a new movie coming out December 25th called Concussion, which is basically the story of how the NFL kept quiet on head injury information for all these years. And then, of course, we have pathology that has showed that examination of deceased players' brains had a lot of head trauma there. So, painting that picture,
yes,
we all kind of know what's going on in the NFL. That's a whole different story, and although I care about it, I actually care a lot more about youth sports. So, why should we be paying attention to head injuries or concussions as it relates to kids involved in sports?
Well, concussions occur not only in sports, but within other activities in life. In fact, we talk so much about sport-related concussions, and yet that is the third most frequent cause of concussions in our society, following motor vehicle accidents and falls. But I think that we as a society value our youth very much, and therefore we obviously want to make activities of our youth safe. And so the awareness that has occurred in concussions and concussions management over the last 10 to 15 years has been very beneficial to our youth. And hopefully our kids will benefit from the many things that they receive from sports and yet can participate at a safe level. And though we seem to really concentrate on football, it can happen in any athletic activity. I've even seen numerous times concussions from cheerleading.
Oh, okay, yeah, absolutely. It's very athletic, actually. So, what is happening in the brain with a concussion?
Well, it's not a structural problem. That is, a concussion is not seen on an MRI or on a CAT scan or with an X-ray. It is something that happens at the cellular level. The cells of the brain are traumatized by a force to the body. It can be to the head, it can be to the body in general. But it is a force that has enough energy to disrupt the normal synapses and the normal function of the brain cell. It has to do with sodium and potassium and all those very specific things in how the brain functions.
If you're a coach or a parent, what kinds of signs do you look for if a child may have had a concussion?
Well, first of all, you kind of look, if you were fortunate enough to see the mechanism, that's oftentimes helpful. You know, if you see two football players hitting head to head with a lot of force, you can imagine that one of them is probably going to maybe be traumatized from that to the point of having a concussion. But headaches, feeling in a fog, feeling confused, memory issues, light and noise sensitivity, nausea, balance issues. We use a checklist when we take care of people in our office that has 22 items on it. And the most non-specific of those is simply an athlete going to their coach or parent and saying, I don't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so non-specific, but oftentimes right after the injury, the headache hasn't begun yet, or they don't know why they don't feel right. It's just something's wrong. And now we have more awareness that that is something that needs to be evaluated, watched.
Mm-hmm.
So
what have you seen locally? Well, you said the cheerleading,
well,
but other than that,
again, I see concussions from virtually all sports. Football is, you might say, the biggest offender. Women's sports, soccer and basketball in particular, are then the second worst offenders. For some reason, girls actually have a lower threshold to receive concussions than males when you compare, say, women's basketball to men's basketball. But I've seen concussions in volleyball players that might be struck by a ball or a collision with another player. Obviously, hockey is another one of those collision sports. But I've also seen concussions in people who have just been riding their bike, snowboarders, skateboarders. It can happen in basically any activity in which there is speed and the ability to contact something.
Yes. So can you end up with symptoms later, like a day later, maybe even 2 days later?
That is a wonderful question. And yes, it's not uncommon, for instance, for a football player to sustain a big hit Friday night during the game. And maybe they continue to play the game and things are quite subtle. Their coaches aren't even aware of anything. After the game, they go home and they just want to go to bed. They don't want anything to eat. They're maybe not feeling so well. Very unusual. And then maybe the next morning they get up, they're not hungry, they complain of having a headache, and then it kind of clicks. Something's wrong here. A teenager who skipped a meal after a game, who's not hungry at breakfast time, complains that they have a headache, maybe they didn't sleep so well, maybe they're a little nauseous, and so forth. So yes, it's not unusual for hours to elapse, and sometimes even a day or two.
Mm-hmm. So those are all important things for parents to know, because they're with that child after the game is over.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, we used to hear this, people would shrug it off, but, got his bell rung. Ooh,
well,
we're not still saying that anymore, are we?
That was an old term for a concussion.
Yeah.
Got my bell rung, I saw stars for a second, but now I'm okay. And that was very common, again, using football as an example, where the coach might tell you to take a knee, take off your helmet, sit out the rest of this series. When you're ready to go back in, let me know. And of course, we're all concerned about losing our position, and so we would go back in as soon as possible.
Well, you know what? That's really changed. That has changed a lot. We're going to take a break right now.
Because oftentimes parents will come in with their child to see the doctor or go to an urgent care facility, and they'll be expecting that their child can resume full participation after clearance on that day. But Eric, you're exactly right. It takes 5 days of a graduated program of increasing their exertion level until they're ready to go back. Stan Herring, who's really the originator of the Zach Lystedt law, along with Zach Lystedt and his family, came down and put on a conference this last May for not only physicians and providers in the community, but also for the community members at large. It was very well attended by several hundred people. And what we learned that night is that we are on board, we are in line with the standard of care, with someone who really wrote the book on concussion care in Stan Herring. And I agree with Eric in that, sure, it's evolving, but for what we know about concussions right now, we're taking care of concussions appropriately. What I would hate to see happen is that parents become so concerned about concussions and concussion risk that they start taking their kids out of sports, even collision sports like football. We have, and Dr. Herring commented on this, and I comment on this to my patients all the time. We are having many more problems in our society with childhood inactivity, obesity, unhealthy behaviors based on inactivity that I would really, I I'm just hopeful that people don't be so concerned and focused on concussions that they start taking their kids out of sports. Sports, any activity has a risk. Walking across the street has a risk. And so sports are as safe now as they've ever been, and they are great for the development of our children.
All right. Well said, Dr. Jacobs.